Hello, it's Daniel Bryant here. Before we start today's podcast, I wanted to tell you about QCon London 2024, our flagship conference that takes place in the heart of London next April 8th to 10th. Learn about senior practitioners' experiences and explore their points of view on emerging trends and best practices across topics like software architectures, generative AI, platform engineering, observability, and the secure software supply chain. Discover what your peers have learned, explore the techniques they are using, and learn about the pitfalls to avoid. I'll be there hosting the platform engineering track. Learn more at qconlondon.com. I hope to see you there. Hello and welcome to the InfoQ podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Bryant, and today we have members of the editorial staff and friends of InfoQ discussing the current trends within the cloud and DevOps space. We'll cover topics ranging from AI and low-code, no-code, the changing face of serverless, the impact of shift left and security, and sustainability within the cloud. I'll start by letting everyone introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Helen Beale. I am Chief Ambassador at DevOps Institute, now part of the PeopleCert family, also Chair of the Value Stream Management Consortium and Co-Chair of the Value Stream Management Interoperability Technical Committee at Open Oasis, and a Strategic Advisor on Ways of Working. Lovely to be here.
Thank you very much then. Abby, over to you.
Hi, yes, I'm Abby Bangser. I'm based in London as a principal engineer at Syntasso, working on platform engineering solutions. I've also worked with the InfoQ group before, including just recently at QCon London with the debugging production track. Glad to be here.
Fantastic. Matt, over to you.
Thank you. Matt Campbell. I'm based in Canada, lead editor for the DevOps queue for InfoQ, and then also VP of Cloud Platform for an education company called D2L, where we do a lot of platform engineering stuff.
Fantastic. And finally, last but not least, Steve-Jan, over to you.
Yes, Stef-Jan Weir. So I'm based in the Netherlands. I'm a lead cloud editor at InfoQ for the last couple of years. I work as an integration Azure architect for IAC in the Netherlands. And yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy days to join us. We'll launch straight in. Try not to be too controversial on the first question, right? But I want to set the high level piece. Now, two things with the cloud and DevOps space. I'm hearing cloud innovation is slowing down. Our colleague InfoQ, Renato, did a fantastic piece covering Amazon reInvent, and even he said that it's more evolution rather than revolution. Also, we've been seeing, is DevOps dead? We had some interesting conversations around that, right? So I'd love to get everyone's thoughts in terms of what do you see the big picture with cloud and DevOps? How are things moving? Where do you think things are going?
So I think it's probably true that innovation has slowed a little bit around cloud. I mean, it's gone really, really fast for a long time, and now a lot of people are trying to adopt it. I think, we've got over things like lift and shift and learned a lot about not doing things like that, but there's still a lot of work for people to move workloads and re-architect workloads and things like that and adopt the things that have been invented for them. As for DevOps, definitely not dead. Don't be ridiculous. However, I would say that it has some problems sort of 13 years into its journey. It's reached some stagnancy, maybe dormancy in some organizations. They're struggling to really get it to the next level. That's personally one of the reasons I'm particularly interested in value stream management, as I see that as an option to help people unlock the flow and the value realization parts of it. But definitely not dead, absolutely in the mainstream. Lots of organisations still working on getting it right in their organisations. I'm going to ask Abby to respond and let me know how much of what I've said she agrees with.
Yeah, I think that whole, just to go for the easy one first, I agree on the cloud space. I think there's been a lot of evolution towards the original goal of cloud computing, which is access to the resources that you need on demand and with easy scalability. And we can see that now moving across more and more types of resources and becoming more ubiquitous, which is looking like evolution, even though in those spaces, it's revolutionary. I think that there's the DevOps conversation is really interesting because, as you say, the, again, intention of DevOps, just like the intention of cloud, I think is still alive and well. The intention of giving people access and autonomy in their teams to create business value without blockers is still something that we are all striving for and working hard towards. I think the concept of trying to say it is a developer person and an operations person sitting together on a team was never quite the intention, but was the attempted implementation, which we're now seeing cracks in after years of trying to do it. And I think that's showing rise to some of the other changes we're going to be talking a bit about in platforms, internal platforms, and other things. So absolutely.
Matt, I see you nodding along there a few times.
Yeah, I would agree. I think one of my favorite topics of late is the sort of cognitive pressure that people are put under. And I think, Abby, you were hitting on that, and Helen as well, where there's just in the approach to try to localize the development, to try to make sure we could deliver business value faster, we also overloaded teams. And even with all the cloud innovation that's happening, every time something new comes out, you have to figure out how that's going to fit in your worldview, how I'm going to integrate that into what I'm doing. Does it add value to what I'm doing? And I think we're seeing everyone has a lot on their plate. The tech landscape changes very quickly. Businesses want to evolve and adapt quickly as well. So I think it's all somewhat interconnected with the slowdown, in that we're now in a phase where we're trying to figure out how do we sustainably leverage all of the cool stuff that we've invented and created and all these ways of interacting with each other and move it to a place where we can innovate comfortably going forward.
Love it. Steve Yan, so you're nodding along there too.
Well, I did see a massive, adoption of the cloud predominantly because of COVID. Yeah, I agree that a lot of that, gives a burden on development, and even I have to do a lot in the cloud. I do see some evolution with regards that also concurs with DevOps is with the automated setup environment. So recently, some of the cloud providers like Azure have this automated way, not just setting up a dev box, but also complete environments. So I see some evolution in that area as well, that we start lifting and shifting that type of ways so that you have a completely development test automated development street, basically setting that up. Like that, we said, we try to get the dev and ops sitting together, because I usually still see a little bit of a wall between them, and it comes around to identity and access management, that kind of stuff. You still, kind of need access to certain resources, or you need to access certain tiers, and then you don't get them because someone on the DevOps side, I haven't got the time for it yet. So some of that stuff is not yet automated. So I still see a little bit of a gap there too. That's from personal experience. I still feel that dev and ops, there's always this little boundary between them. It has to do with predominantly identity and access management.
It's very interesting, Steve. I definitely think the whole like DevOps, I like everyone sort of riffed on that, like joking in a presentation I did a few years ago. So it's like should really be biz dev quat ops at least, right? There's a whole bunch of things that should be in there. But you know what developers are like, well, engineers, I should say, architects. We just like that snappy title, right? So I think that was a great call out, which I'm sure we'll dive into many times throughout the podcast. I did like the focus on revolution, and Matt, you mentioned about sort of cognitive overload, those kind of things, popularized by team topologies, which I think we'll cover as well. But on that notion, we can't get away from the impact AI and LLMs in particular has had over the last 6 months, right? And that's, definitely since the last trend report we did. I'd love to get folks' thought on what value does AI add to someone who's going to be listening to the podcast, either as an engineer, an architect, a technical leader. What do you think the immediate impact is of these kind of large language models, and where do you think it's going?
Well, I can start again if you like. I mean, yesterday, funny enough, I was doing a similar one of these about observability, but we ended up talking about AI quite a lot. And initially in the context of AI ops, which of course isn't so much about the large language models, but more about algorithms and machine learning. And absolutely what Matt said about cognitive pressure, cognitive load limits in humans is a big problem when we're dealing with lots and lots of data coming out of lots and lots of monitoring systems and creating huge amounts of alert noise. So AIOps has a very strong use case there in this instant management, which is where we started having the conversation. But we, of course, got on to ChatGPT and the generative AI as well. And one of the particularly interesting use cases I found, or I heard from the team yesterday, was around, again, instant management, but this time ticketing. So developers probably remember things like the rubber duck. You'd have a rubber duck on your desk and you'd have to talk to it if you had a problem before you were allowed to bother somebody else with your problem. Because generally you'd find if you had a conversation, you'd come to a solution. And they're doing a similar thing at the insurance company that was on this talk yesterday, and they're actually using it in their ticketing system. So instead of raising a ticket, it's encouraging you to chat with the AI, and then once you get to a point, it's like, actually no, we are going to have to raise a ticket for this thing. And I think there was a few other ones. Of course, the developer kind of co-pilot things are getting code snippets, and I think there's just a huge opportunity here for some leapfrogging. I see it in some of my daily work. So for example, recently we had a problem where we were writing a new course and the guy that was writing it was running out of time, and we needed some instructor notes writing. And usually in the past, that would have meant I'd Google the topic, spend 15 minutes digesting the information, and then, regurgitate something into an instructor note. But I could leapfrog sort of 15 minutes of work by asking ChatGPT the question and then validating the information and shuffling it around into taking the right bits out and the bits I didn't want out as well. But another slightly off topic but interesting ChatGPT story. I was doing some work on a novel that I'm writing this morning. And the scene I'm particularly writing, it's set on a celebrity cooking show and somebody's about to sabotage the cooking competition. First of all, I did it in Pseudo-Write, actually, which is a large language program for writers. And it came out with all sorts of suggestions about fiddling with utensils and ingredients. And then I stuck it in Bard, and Bard said, I'm a large language model thing and I can't help you. And then I stuck it in ChatGPT, and ChatGPT said, basically, I'm morally not allowed to help you with that. You're trying to sabotage somebody. So I thought that was great, though, seeing the ethics going on in the large scale open tools was fun. Anyway, probably a little off topic. Apologies for that.
Who would have thought cooking in the InfoQ Cloud DevOps podcast? Fantastic. Anyone else got any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I do. From the more than Microsoft side, I see a huge push through OpenAI initiatives, like Helen mentioned, Copilot. So many of the Azure and even Microsoft Cloud products and services now have a Copilot. So you see it in their tooling, like Visual Studio, Visual Code. You see it at Microsoft and the Dynamics side that they have Copilots. A lot of the services at Microsoft, even something recent, the Microsoft Fabric, which is a complete SaaS data lake or lakehouse solution they have, is completely infused with AI. So yeah, you definitely see a big push and an investment on the Microsoft side.
Yeah, I think to your question of like what would listeners care about in this space, I think the big thing is just to start getting involved and exploring what is possible and not possible, because it's very easy to poke fun at the prompts that show up on social media of like, look at how silly this AI is, the robots are definitely not coming for us, because it's true. There are things that you do need to validate. Helen talked about getting information back and then validating it before going off and posting that to a project or to a course. But at the same time, having an idea of what can be done for you, even if it's not yet in the language models today, and where you will be able to add value is, I think, a really big piece of what we're trying to figure out right now. And we're also just trying to figure out what that evolution will look like. And I think that prompting, there's that joke about being a prompt engineer instead of being a software engineer. I think it's a joke today to many people, but actually that ability to be creative and to think critically about the problem in order to generate useful suggestions, that's effective in a meeting. That's going to be even more effective when you start applying things like a large language model to it. So I think these are all the things that are coming down the pipe at us because of this new technology.
Fantastic. Matt, any thoughts on that one?
Well, it sounds like DevOps is going to get replaced by Dev Prompt Ops then,
Yeah, love it.
is what you're saying there. So yeah, I love the idea of leveraging tools like this to make our lives easier. Like I think that's always been the dream of technology, is that we would have flying cars and be able to not have to work as much. And in some cases, kind of circling back to the first question, a lot of the innovation I think has actually maybe made us work harder in order to achieve some of our outcomes. And I love the idea, going back, like Helen, you're talking about with AI ops, and using that for monitoring, and especially with distributed systems, as you get observability in there, it's really hard to try to trace down where something's actually broken, and having a system be able to do the first stab at that and report back, maybe look over here and remove that. Something recent at work, somebody wanted to learn how to use Antler to help process a large amount of data that we had, and used ChatGPT to kind of help construct some of the initial scripts as a way to kind of guide their learning in that. So using it to help prompt you and fill in gaps and give you a jump start. I think that as an initial jumping off point is pretty awesome usage of it. I'd love to see more developments in that area.
Yeah, and I love all the great sort of comments about sort of the validation, the ethics involved, for sure. And I think we're all saying like the Copilot, the pair programmer, the summarization is super useful. And I was kind of wondering, I was doing a lot of work back in the low code space a while ago. What do you think the impact of, say, AI is on low code? Is it disrupting it, right? The whole low code, no code space? Or is it going to augment it in that the tools to make things simpler were already there and now they're perhaps going to get even better? So I'd love to get people's thoughts on where do you think this low code, no code tools that are available in the cloud, where do you think they're going to go with the impact of AI?
Funny enough, that came up in the conversation yesterday as well when we were doing takeaways. And the same chap from the insurance company that I was talking about, when I asked him for his vision of the future, that's exactly what he wanted. And as a head of DevOps in the technical team, what he actually wanted is his business teams to be able to use AI so that they could drive particularly things like self-healing and remediation around their core business systems. So people are definitely looking for that connection. I haven't seen anybody having it yet, but something that definitely I've seen people have appetite for. Has anybody seen it in action in the real world yet?
So listeners of the podcast, there's a business opportunity there, right?
A huge business opportunity. And I found it really interesting because traditionally when I've been a consultant, when we've had conversations about business people doing stuff with systems, people have started shouting about shadow IT and it being very undesirable to have these business people having their hands in the systems to that extent. So I found it quite interesting that we seem to be turning a corner because AI is actually supporting the business people, giving them an amount of knowledge that is probably safe. Like a small amount of knowledge can be dangerous. It feels like actually AI is lifting us out of that space where we can be trusted. And perhaps in the point that I made in response was it would be great to stop having this division between product management and software engineering, the business as people call it in technology, and actually having us collaborate as single value streams would be fabulous.
I think it's really interesting with that point about how dangerous is it to have someone who doesn't particularly know about code to use these low code platforms. I think that's been the biggest debate on their uptake. And I've been hearing a lot of increased conversation about click ops, which used to be talked about in the sense of clicking around a browser to be able to solve your problem. But today's products and leaders in that space are talking about how you enable people to click around and do things if that is the right interface for them, but you result in code or something that is version controlled, is declarative in nature, and can be understood and evolved. And I think that the exciting bit about the LLMs and the AI side of things is that we're getting better and better code generation. We're seeing that with Copilot, with Codium, with lots and lots of other tools. Can we get even better code generation people can actually use that don't want to click around the UI, can actually read, can actually evolve, can actually meet standards of our organization's code, but from that no code, low code spot? I think that will be an interesting evolution.
Yeah, I think so too. If you can prompt or talk and then have it out visualized through low code, I've worked a lot with low code platforms, at least in the Microsoft space or Logic apps, that it can be out generated and then you have your business process right in front of you. You could do clicking it around, that's correct, but usually it's left up to us instead of left up to them. But if you can just have it generated and then your business process right in your face, it runs, and there's always, kind of a code behind stuff that is generated for you. So that can definitely work. The interesting thing, though, would be in the end of the day, the governance with regards to accessing certain parts of data, right? That's always been the case with low code. Even if you look at the low code platforms on the Microsoft side and the cloud side, which is actually called Power Automate and that kind of stuff. And then it's easy for them to use, even business people, and they call them citizen developers. But in the end of the day, it's also about the data and the governance that they are using, at least access to data. And then sometimes it gets a bit weary that they get too much power or too much access to certain data. So
I think that's the sort of merger between the low code and platform engineering, and that we want to provide a safe platform that complies with our governance needs, but also empowers the users of it to be able to get their job done. And I do see, like, even with some of the low code systems being challenging for end users to use, so getting some of the prompt engineering and ChatGPT stuff into that, I think could be helpful in almost like a telling it what you want and it kind of helping to build a skeleton for you to flesh out. My guess is we're going to see a lot more evolution in this area as we look to try to drive more business value quickly, and then also see this start to, Steve Jan's point there, improve in the layer of governance and sort of the platform engineering kind of DevOpsy layer of that, so that those platform teams can take care of that part for the users of the low code without them needing to worry about that or worry about crossing any boundaries you don't want to be crossing.
Fantastic summary, everyone. Yeah, and I've heard several times sort of implicitly we've mentioned about platforms, right? Now, most of us here have been building platforms for like 10, 20 years, right? But platform engineering has become a thing du jour. Like people have really locked on to that with good reason. Like DevOps, many of us were doing DevOps before it became a thing, right? But giving us a label does help build a community and drive the principles of that space forward. So I'd love to get folks' thoughts around platform engineering. Particularly, I was thinking of things like Kubernetes and service mesh, all the rage for the last 5 years. Are they getting pushed down? To everyone's points about hiding some of that complexity, right? Reducing some of that cognitive load. And Abby, you pointed out in our sort of a chat before the podcast started around team topologies going through a new evolution as well. And that everyone I seem to be chatting to too is adopting some form of team topologies, and that platform as a service, not as in PaaS, but more as in offering a platform as a service, is seemingly everywhere at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to see something like team topologies in the early majority and something like self-service platforms in the late majority when I look at what I see around the industry and around the people that I work with. And I think that one of the big things is, what does self-service actually mean in these organizations, and what application of team topologies is being applied? How much of it is in theory agreed, and how much of it's really driving how you organize your teams and how you organize also their interaction models, not just how you organize their teams, but how they interact. And so I think what I'm seeing is with self-service, a lot of teams are saying they have self-service. I, a couple of years ago, was saying I had a self-service platform. And the way that people would self-serve from that is they would make a pull request into a repo with some code, because they would have to have learned how to use a Terraform module, or how to have extended a YAML values file, or something else which was not core to their business value delivery, and still required some level of a ticketing system. It's different than ServiceNow or Jira or something else. It is a pull request in GitHub, GitLab, and other repository types, but it's still a ticketing system that relies on a human. And I think today we're talking a lot more about what is an API. What is something where we can actually separate the concerns of the consumers, being the application developers or other members around the organization, and the producers, being the platform team. And I think that's where that revolution right now is happening with people because of team topologies conversations.
I'm particularly interested in its application within value stream management as well. When we look at the stream-aligned team as being what I would call the kind of core team that's doing the work that's going to make the difference to the ultimate customer. And then we've got the supporting type teams like the platform teams that help the stream-aligned teams do that work. My particular favorite pattern for the platform team isn't in the cloud, actually, it's in the DevOps space. So it's kind of, historically, when we've seen adoption of DevOps and specifically CI/CD pipelines, we've seen them mushroom up in little development teams all through an enterprise. And there becomes like a critical mass where people are starting saying, well, we've got all these different tools, shouldn't we standardize? Then there's absolute uproar because people will get very emotionally attached to their tools, quite understandably. But then you get a whole other group of people in an organization that are desperate for the DevOps tool chains and don't have the skills and the knowledge. So actually having a platform engineering team or a platform team that provide a DevOps tool chain as a service solves a few problems. It makes the whole technology stack much more available to the people that haven't yet got there, and then kind of enables the conversation around standardization, which is much easier to have if you talk about the kind of architectural configuration of a tool chain rather than the specific flavors of tools within it. And then that central team can talk about what they've got skills to support and what might be exceptions that people will need to support themselves if they want to continue using them.
I think I just quickly add to that, because I think it's a really good description, how much the change in the perception of the platform engineers on the platform team as a service team to the rest of the organization, rather than as the keeper of the complex bottom layer information, is what's really driving all this change. Instead of being like, you will use our tools because we told you you will. Even if you really attach to the things that you used to use, they are no longer compliant and they are no longer cost efficient or sustainable. The engineering teams don't care about those things. They want to use the things they want to use and they want to go to production quickly. And today, platform engineering teams are learning about what developer relations looks like and marketing, and what does it look like to actually engage with customers and get feedback and have a roadmap that meets their needs and the business constraints that the platform engineering team is managing and working under.
Those are all fantastic points. And Daniel kind of mentioned like platform engineering is not a new thing. As many things in our industry, it's an old thing that maybe some of us forgot about and then now we're remembering and it feels like a new thing. But there are new parts to it, I think, that maybe we're bringing up. And Abby, you kind of just commented on those where we're, as opposed to treating platform engineering as a thing we build that people must use, we're trying to find ways to build things that delight our end users and actually drive value and make them want to use it because of the value that it's adding. And I think in that regard, Daniel, to your initial question, we are seeing sort of the technologies pushed down a little bit. And Helen, to your point, that API layer, that interface layer being added to simplify the interaction to help drive better business value and to make it easier for teams to get in there and not have to learn all the intricacies and all the fun stuff that YAML brings to the table, as you mentioned, Abby. So yeah, it's a really exciting time and a really interesting evolution that we're seeing there. I really love the platform as a product framing that we have this time around.
Yeah, I love it, Matt. Just to double down on that, when I was at QCon, Kubernetes conference, right? I was chatting to folks, and the overwhelming, anecdotal data that people were pushing Kubernetes down the stack at KubeCon. I find this kind of bizarre, right? They're like, well, my engineers just want to go into some interface and define something or call some API, to Abby's point. And I was like, wow, this is KubeCon, right? And it's really interesting seeing the evolution of trends at a conference where, it's really like about the technology, arguably, right? And now it's pushing more towards the platforms. I saw a lot of push towards observability, which we've covered a few times as well, but not just observability in terms of, say, SLI, service level indicators, but also things around KPIs, like key performance indicators. And a big one of that was financial. Folks are now, particularly in this like non-zero interest rate phenomenon, right, we're going through now, folks are really concerned about how much am I spending on this platform. No more spinning up some huge database, poking around, shutting it down, whatever. Like, you got to justify that cost. And I think, Steve-Jan, you mentioned sort of offline around Finops going into the early majority. I'd love to get your take on that, because I think I'm hearing more and more about Finops. I initially learned it from Simon Wardley, fantastic blogs he's got out there, but now I'm seeing it very much go more into the mainstream as you're pitching, Steve-Jan. So love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's correct. There's more companies joining the Finops Foundation, which provides the support and processes around Finops. I do see a lot of tools popping up that can support your Finops and give you a look into what you're actually spending. But I feel that it's also important about the process and what are you spending versus what value are you getting out of it versus, just looking at tools. Because, the tools give you an idea, okay, I'm spending, but is the spending what you do justified or not? And that's what I think is great about the Finops Foundation coming in, and more companies like Microsoft and I think other companies, cloud companies as well, are just adopting it and are part of that journey as well. There's even ways of getting to know the processes. I think you can even do certifications. In my line of work, I see it more and more the discussion, okay, we have this running, but are we actually using it? We're not using it, okay, we just get rid of it or we just turn it down. So even I see that back in our discussion as well. Why have we cut things running? And even on the personal side, I've got an MVP subscription, which allows me to basically burn money. But then I'm starting to get aware, like, these demos, I'm not using them. You know what? I'm just shutting them down. Although the credits are free, but it doesn't make sense. So even I'm starting to get more aware because Finops also has to do with sustainability, which I learned during the latest QCon in London from Holly Commons with this light switch up, making us aware that we have stuff running that costs money. And I think it's even like 21 billion a year or two ago, they were figured out, all the cloud costs combined. It's insane. So it makes us aware that we should only spend when we should spend, right? Like a flick of a switch with energy.
I think it's related to some of the sustainability and green ops things as well. So with the AI ops space, we've been having quite a lot of conversations about data and the fact that it seems like you might need to have a lot of data and therefore a lot of storage in order to get the information that you want, but making the differentiation between data at rest and data at motion is quite important in that context. Additionally, the AI steps in again. Obviously, that's part of AI ops, but another way that AI can help us in your classic big data scenarios, increasingly it can identify where you've got data that's not being used, where there's no APIs or anything that is calling, it's not being used as an asset by any of your applications. So increasingly, AI is becoming like a data housekeeper where it can tidy up and save us space. And that's good from a planetary perspective as well as a personal kind of or a company financial perspective.
So changing gears, at InfoQ, we've definitely seen a lot of attention being put on security now. With the software supply chains, SBOMs, there's lots of great technology going on in that space as well. When I go to conferences, I'm hearing anecdotal information from developers that they're getting a bit overwhelmed with this whole shift left, right? Some folks are even jumping, it's more of a dump left, as in they're just dumping all the responsibilities left, do you know what I mean? Rather than actually thinking about how can developers think more about security. I need the tools, I need the mental models, right? So I'd love to hear folks' thoughts on, are you seeing folks in the wild caring more about this? Are they implementing more of the solutions? And what's the impact on developers and architects?
Yeah, I see a lot of it in my line of work. So security becomes more important. You're right about the shift left. At least developers are giving the burden of making things more secure. When it comes to cloud platforms, they have to deal with the operational side of things too, with identity and access management, but also their, let's say, functions or whatever they're running, like code, accessing what type of system, what type of security model is in place. Predominantly or most commonly, it's OAuth. And yeah, that's kind of what you need to do. You need to go to the identity provider, get the token, and then access the service. Or even some of the platform have something like managed identity. So then the cloud platform takes away that, and then you have to be aware of that. And then it comes back to giving the managed identity access to, whether it's also key vaults and that kind of stuff. So it all migrates into that developer that needs to be aware of all these nitty-gritty details. So it's definitely, it can be overwhelming if you're less, say, security aware.
It's definitely important, and I'm seeing more of a push towards it by leadership, which is usually the thing that pushes security onto the developers, right? Because developers, and not every developer, but many that are there, their first instinct is not to go straight to the SBOMs, right? If they're being pushed for new features, that's what they're focusing on. But when the company has raised that the risk there for security is important enough, they will take on that responsibility and do that work. I think the interesting thing about security is it's going through a similar evolution and growth pattern that a lot of technologies go through, which is the first solutions are made by experts and they often need to be used by experts. And eventually those start to get smoothed out and become easier to be used by other people in the industry, more user-friendly. And I think that that's maybe the phase that we're getting into now with the security tooling, is people are realizing that some of the early days security tooling isn't quite user-friendly, and the current tooling is trying to evolve into more user-friendly ways of working.
Yeah, I would agree that there's definitely a lot of research into SBOMs specifically about questionable implementations and value of them, and are they actually delivering on what they say they're going to be delivering? And then I think to your point, Abby, like there's new frameworks coming out like Salsa that as a product developer might be too in depth for me to actually be able to get into and understand how do I actually do anything with this. And I think the gap that we need to look to fill is, circling back to team topologies, is treating security as an enablement function and finding ways to have that team build platforms that can help with some of these things, but then also enable through education to make sure that teams understand the important parts of the things that they need to do as they're working through the code. I would agree. It definitely feels a lot like a dump left. at this point with just all these things going on. And the big push from leadership, from even from the government level to help shore up the supply chain is leading to a lot of, to your point, Abby, like expert driven implementations, which don't necessarily translate well to ground level trying to get it into your code.
Now, I know we're mainly focused on high-level techniques and approaches in our trend report, but I did want to dive a little bit deeper for a moment on a couple of cloud technologies that I think these are having an outsized impact. And the first one is WebAssembly, WASM, and the second one is eBPF, which we're seeing a whole bunch too. Now, I've just got back from a fantastic event in New York, QCon New York, and there was a really good presentation by Bailey Hayes from Cosmonic on WebAssembly components. I've also been reading a whole bunch from Matt Butcher and the Fermion team about what they're doing with WebAssembly too. I'm really seeing this promise of the write once, run anywhere, which I appreciate is a bit ironic coming from a Java developer, right? I've worked in Java for 20 plus years, and this is one of the platform's original promises, but I think this is the next evolution of that promise, if you like. Now, both Bailey and Matt and others have been talking about building this case for reusability and interoperability. So the idea with WebAssembly components that Bailey was talking about is you could build libraries effectively in, say, Go, and then call them from a Rust application. And any language that can compile down to WASM, this kind of promise stands, which I thought was really easy for that true vision of a component model within the cloud, right? I also thought it was super interesting, like you can build your application for multiple platform targets. Now, given the rise of ARM-based CPUs across all the cloud hyperscalers and the performance and the price points, this is really quite attractive. I know Jessica Kerr has talked to InfoQ multiple times about the performance increases and some of the cost savings as well that the Honeycomb team saw when they migrated some workloads to the AWS Graviton processors from Intel processors. So very interesting thinking points there. I'm also seeing WASM adopted a lot in the format as the cloud platform extension format. For example, I grew up writing Lua code to extend Nginx and OpenResty, and now we're increasingly seeing WASM take that space. They're being used to extend cloud-native proxies like Envoy and the API gateways and service meshes that this technology powers. In regard to eBPF, I'm definitely seeing this more as a platform component developers use case. So maybe we as application engineers won't be using it quite so much, but I'm seeing the implementation of the CNCF's container network interface, such as Cilium. I shout out to my friend Liz Rice and the AI Surveillance folks doing a lot of great content on this, and also seeing a lot in the security space on this. Project Falco, or the Falco project from the Sysdig folks, are embracing eBPF for security use cases, really nice general purpose security use cases. And Matt, have you got any thoughts on this too?
Yeah, no, definitely. We're seeing a lot of really interesting usages of this technology within observability. And then also circling back with security as well, because it's allowing you to get closer to the kernel, closer to what's actually happening on your systems within your containers. So you're getting quicker, in some ways more accurate, and some ways safer, like less likely to be potentially tampered with in the event of something malicious going on, data about how your system's operating. So that's been the major push that I've seen usage of this. I'll admit this is not an area that I'm super well versed in, so I'm not going to make any predictions about where it's going to go. But I think those current usages have definitely been really interesting.
Fantastic, Matt. Fantastic. Should we move on to OpenTelemetry? I saw a couple of folks highlighted OpenTelemetry. And again, we've mentioned observability several times in the podcast, right? And I keep hearing OpenTelemetry, all the things, because it is great work. I'm lucky enough to work with a few of the folks in that space. I'd love to get folks' thoughts on where you're seeing the adoption and what do you think the future is in this space?
So for me, it's gone really rapidly in my AI ops world from a this is coming soon to this is what you should be using, de facto standard, everyone. It works really well, really, really fast, like faster, I think, than I've seen anything else be adopted. Abby's nodding. She agrees with me.
Yes, I just think it's something that took a long time to get to version 1 in a lot of languages, but once it got there, it had been being built by so many amazing people around the industry and was cross-vendor to begin with. There was many vendors that were actively putting their engineering time into building this the right way that I think it became quite easy to call it the de facto. And it's so core to your applications, it needs to be that cross-language friendly in order to be used across your platform. So absolutely.
Yeah, I've seen it too. Like Helen said, I agree. I see a rapid adoption too, because like last year, I've never heard of it, but now I have. And it's even Microsoft even are embracing it and putting it into Azure Monitor and stuff. And last QCon London, there were there was a great presentation on OpenTelemetry. It came about people like Honeycomb.io that have adopted it. So it's cross-vendor, right? So there's a lot of adoption there too. And it's something similar that I wish happened in the IoT space, getting something standardized, right? So if it's around eventing, right? Event-driven architecture, you got something like cloud events, pretty rapid adoption. You see some services and left and right in cloud, and even in open source world where they have tooling around event-driven architecture with cloud events, and then you have similar with open telemetry, right? You got these standardized that they agreed upon, and then it becomes vendor agnostic, and that's super. So you create telemetry, and then you export it, and then you can use X amount of tools that all have their own little thing can do with the telemetry. That's what I've learned from people during QCon. Some of the vendors that are supporting it's like, yeah, we have our own little thing where we do something with memory consumption and execution and that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. So yeah, even I am excited.
Well, that's high praise, Stephen, high praise.
And I think the vendor agnostic bit, you can think of it as, oh, it's no vendor lock-in. We get away from vendor lock-in. But as you say, what it gives is actually a requirement now that the vendors optimize and provide something that's more interesting. It's no longer that they're competing at getting to the baseline. I can collect your metrics, your events, your traces, and visualize them. Now they have to be doing the next level of interesting thing for them to gain customers and gain market share. That's the really big power in my mind around something like this open telemetry or other open standards, is the movement of the industry that happens once standards come about.
One more technology thing I'd love to quickly look at is serverless. Last year we said serverless as a baseline, and we see serverless popping up all over the place. Steve Yan, I was reading one of your news items, I think it was recently, about serverless for migrations, things like that. I don't hear like the word serverless that much anymore, but is it because it's becoming just like part of the normal choices, right? We just sort of, we push the technology away, but we are embracing the actual core products that use it. So yeah, what's folks' thoughts on adoption levels of serverless?
Well, I think serverless becomes just managed. Like we have a managed service for you. And then, usually a lot of these services have something like auto scale in it, and you have units that you need to pay for, right? So that's some micro billing stuff. So it's what you consume. And it's all migrated into what we call managed service. Sometimes you see pop up, we have a tier in our product that now is called serverless something. Serverless database or serverless, any type of resource. When it's AWS, Google, or Microsoft, a lot of their services now also have some serverless component in that too, which means the auto scale, which means the micro billing, which means all the infrastructure is abstracted away, which you don't see. So making it easier for the end user, basically. And sometimes dropping even the name serverless.
Nicely said.
Yeah, that move from sort of serverless as an architectural choice of, say, building on Lambdas versus building on virtual machines, to Stefan's point, versus moving to managed services. So I think that's the transition we're maybe seeing here. I think serverless became that kind of proverbial hammer, and then everything became a nail, where, we've seen a few cases recently, some very overblown in the news, of companies moving from serverless back to monolithic applications. But the move towards managed services really does fit the mold with the platform engineering approach, trying to reduce cognitive overload, shifting who is working on what to other people. For most of our businesses, our customers are not buying us because we built the best serverless architecture. They're buying us because we built the best product. So having somebody who's an expert in running those managed services run them for you is just good business sense in a lot of ways. So I think that might be the shift that we're seeing here.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things we might be seeing is the impact of the value of serverless actually coming out in other ways at this stage. And again, moving on from the architectural decision and saying, what does serverless give us? It gives us scaling to zero. It gives us the ability to cost per request. And so we talked about Finops already. Your ability to understand where to cut costs has to be dependent on what is your cost of customer acquisition, what is your cost of customer support and of a request. That's where serverless really shined. And now people know that's possible and they're asking for that. Now, does it have to be done through a serverless architecture? Absolutely not. But it's something that now the organization is asking from their engineering team, and that's coming out in other architectures as well.
So we've talked about the changes of pricing several times there, and I'd like to sort of wrap this together in terms of, Steve Yan, you touched on it earlier on, of pricing relating to the impact and sustainability, things like that, being sort of charged maybe on how much you're consuming or polluting, arguably, these kind of things, right? I'd love to get people's thoughts on the adoption level of thinking about prices in architectures and choosing managed services, as Matt said there, and where you think that's going in the future.
I'm interested to hear the others' view on how much of this falls into the SRE camp and into the SLXs, because I can't be bothered to say them all. But it feels to me like this is the natural kind of node of the technology team to figure this stuff out. What do other people think?
Yeah, I agree. It's my day to day. If you start thinking about architecture and then thinking about the services, how you want to componentize, how you want to create the architecture, and then it comes boils down to, okay, what type of isolation do or do we not need, security in the end. Then you're coming into the price ranges of what type of product. If it's completely like what I've recently learned, like a term called air gap. So the environment needs to be air gap. That means, okay, then we end up in the highest SKU of almost all our services, networking, firewalls, everything. And that comes with quite a cost. You're talking about TCOs that come into over 10, 20, maybe 30,000 a month. And do you really need that? Is that really a requirement? If you're a big enterprise, presumably, but if you're a small and medium small business, I'm not so sure. There's other ways to secure things. So, and even some of the cloud vendors are also providing some of the services that are like touching the middle ground. So not high end or low end with the enterprise feature, but just in the middle, it could be secure just enough.
I'd like to take a moment now for some final thoughts from each of you, and it can be, reflection on where we've come from, maybe looking forward to the future, something you're excited about, and maybe something for the listeners you'd like them to take away. So, should we go around the room? Shall I start? Matt, I'll start with you, if that's all right.
Yeah, of course. Excellent conversation. Some really, really cool things that are covered off here. For me, the thing that I'm most excited to see, and it's feeling like I'm harping on the same thing, but anything that we can do in the industry to help reduce how much things we need to think about while we're working so that teams can focus in on their area and have the biggest impact. I think that's going to start to drive more innovation. We start to get happier people. People are excited to come to work. They're focused on a thing. They're not trying to juggle 10 different things and now figure out what is an SBOM? Why are they throwing more acronyms at me? So those kind of innovations, mergers of AI ops and ChatGPT into platform engineering, and even the sustainability and Finops stuff, like trying to find ways to reduce cost and reduce the amount of things that we're working with, I think are all good shifts in that direction. So I guess if there's a kind of a call to action, it's, try to build things that move us in that direction. I think that's a healthy way for our industry to go.
Love it. Abby, do you want to go next?
Sure. I think anytime we have these kinds of conversations about trends, it's hard not to talk about the fact that a different word for that might be hype cycles. And I think there's a lot of things that can feel like hype cycles, but the power behind what creates that hype is that there is a nugget of opportunity there. And I think what ends up happening is it's easy to dismiss the nuance and the opportunity to the fact that there is marketing jargon and hype around it that maybe is overselling something or is particularly overselling the application of it, not just what it can do, but also how widely applicable it can be. And I think what's been really interesting about the trends on this call that I've really enjoyed is that a lot of them are not new. We talked about from the first get-go how we've been building platforms for decades across the team here. And I think at the same time, we are doing new things. We are learning from our experiences and we are actively seeing evolution to create more value for our users, for our industry. And I think that's what's really exciting right now.
Fantastic stuff. Helen, do you want to go next?
I'm going to be quite quick and just say that I think I'm going to go and have a chat with Bard about ClickOps because that sounds very interesting.
Fantastic. Steve, yeah, over to you.
Yeah, really happy about all the developments that happen in the cloud, the sustainability, the FinOps, but also seeing open source being adopted everywhere. I really enthusiastic about the open telemetry. I'm interested seeing that cloud events. I see that adoption overall of what happens in that open source, helps us also standardize and maybe even make our lives a little bit better than have to juggle around with all kinds of standards and things you need to do. I hope that the AI-infused services like the co-pilots and stuff and ChatGPT can just make us more productive and try to help us do our jobs better. So I'm excited about that too. So yeah, that's just a lot of things going on. I even enjoyed talking to you all guys. I even learned a lot of things today. So that's also cool.
Amazing. I'll say thank you so much, all of you, for taking time out to join me today. We'll wrap it up there. Thanks a lot.